Weirdest, creepiest, most eerie town/city/place in Michigan that you've ever visited? I lived up in the Upper Peninsula for a while and did on-site IT service for various companies. I had to do everything in order to make a living and cover the entire up, but I had wrought every day. One day I got a contract to go up near Copper Harbor to work on their phone tower during the maintenance windows, which was from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. The instructions on the work order said to call 911 to get access, which I thought was a mistake, so I called them, and they confirmed. 911 went to a cell phone that the only deputy on duty had. So, I called him about an hour before I got there so he could meet me there. When I got to the location, it was an old 1950s-era radar installation. The police officer unlocked the gate to get there and warned me that the bridge was out, so I'd have to walk about a quarter mile when I got up there. So that was cool with the delicate piece of server equipment I had, and he relocked the gate behind me and told me to call him when I wanted out. The cell phone tower was actually sticking out of the old radar dome, so you had to go into the giant old round-top building. Like any military base, it was essentially a small city except abandoned, but since it needed power, all the lights were on. Since it had been abandoned for decades, some of the buildings were falling apart, with bare light bulbs still hanging in them, which was super creepy. So, I get to where the wooden bridge is and it's out just like he said. It looks like it just kind of slid into the ditch it was over. I'm walking up to the place where the tower is and it really intensely seems like I'm being watched, but I assume it's just in my head. So I go to the radar dome building and you have to pull back the thick metal door to get in. The cell phone tower buildings are just these prefab rectangles that look like trailers without wheels bolted to the concrete pad in the center of the room, and it's super dark except for the hole in the top where the tower sticks out has moonlight and my cell phone light. Which was super creepy. Once I get there I have to call and have them shut down the cell phone tower so it's safe for me to enter the buildings, and that takes a few minutes, and they have to give me a code to get in. They tell me they are giving me a 30-minute window and then they will turn it back on, and since I am in Copper Harbor I probably won't have any signal once the tower is shut down. So, they do this, and they are right, my signal goes down full to 0 bars. I go into the server room and swap the equipment, in about 5 minutes, and then make sure it boots up. While I am waiting I look out the peephole and see the metal door to get into the radar dome swinging closed. My heart nearly stops. Now I'm in a locked metal box, but they tell you can't be safely in there when the tower is on. So I watch the time and at 29 minutes and 45 seconds I put on my backpack full of tools, grab the old server like a bear and book it out of that room, listening for the door to slam as I leave. I ran a quarter mile back to my car, and when I get there I get a call from the company I'm working for letting me know everything is okay. I drive back to the gate and the police officer is already there and lets me out, and I said that place was creepy. He said it's supposedly haunted, but he didn't want to tell me before I went in, and some kids had gone in there and disappeared, so that's why they keep it locked. I never took another contract there. My excuse was it was too far in the middle of the night. Alma, Michigan has an old, abandoned water park in a field between the NCG Cinema and the highway towards Mt. Pleasant. My friend and I walked back there to explore it in the winter about 2 years ago. 3 buildings. One had no doors, looked like a restaurant. The ceiling was caved in. Lots of graffiti. Another was like a shed with an old vehicle rusting away within. The third we couldn't get inside, but we could see a machine, a generator maybe. The water slides were still there. They looked dangerously long and curvy. We couldn't even get down to the pool because of all the overgrown trees, but just looking at it was spooky. It looked deeper than it probably was. There was a fence maze thing for kids that was overgrown with vines. Couldn't get extremely far into it. In the same area, next to M46 and NCG Cinema, is an abandoned hotel. I've been in it when it was still open to the public, but going inside once it was closed was eerie. So much mildew and rot. Water damage. We were too scared to go upstairs because the air quality was horrible, and we didn't want to fall onto the floor. We have also been underneath some of the business buildings on the downtown strip of Alma. The basements are very empty, some long tunnels, staircases that don't go anywhere because new floors were built over top of them, rooms that look like wine cellars, but nothing left there. Lots of cobwebs, and the buildings are connected through the basement, so if you get into one building, you just got to go underground and find your way through the maze to get to another building. Astral Beach gives me really creepy vibes. I've mostly only been there at night to water plants and dogs, and I never see anyone. It's eerily quiet except for the sound of water, which is lovely, but you can't really swim there. I never even heard of bugs or frogs or other animals, and I've never seen or heard of another car. Plenty parked out there though. I think I've seen 2 people total in the 10 to 15 times I've been there or drove around, and both were in the middle of the night when they stopped and stared at me as I drove by. I've slept overnight there, and it honestly was even quieter outside in the morning, and I still didn't see anyone in their yards or on the street when I sat out back to watch the water for a few hours, and I didn't see anyone when I drove home. I don't know exactly what creeps me out about the place, but there's something weird to me, and my only guess is the silence and emptiness. People are talking about the emptiness and quietness of the Up, and some even like it, but Astral Beach's homes are fairly close to each other, and although it's small there are plenty of houses. And this silence is different than anything in northern Michigan or the Up. There I at least hear animals. Plenty of bugs making noise, birds, deer, squirrels, frogs, etc. Astral Beach is either silent, you hear the waves, or you hear the hum of electricity. It feels like I'm going to get taken at night. I went camping at Tequamanon Falls in the backcountry a couple of years ago toward the end of August. My brother and I hiked in and set up camp at our site along the main backcountry trail without seeing anyone around. Cooked food, hung out by the fire when we realized we were in complete silence. Not just out in the woods quiet, but silence. Not a chipmunk, or a squirrel, no grasshoppers, or cicadas. We got spooked and headed to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m. to pee and walked out into complete silence and moonlight. I could see everything, but there wasn't a single sound or movement. It was like the entire world was paused and I was the only thing alive. Spooky stuff. I used to live in Florida, and it was a really noisy place. No snow to muffle sound, obviously, but even more people are out in the warm weather, and they create a lot more noise. Also, explosive plant growth requires constant trimming, and so you have mowers, blowers, and all that. It was quite calming to leave all that behind. Warren. I was up in Munising back in July, somewhere in the woods, staying in a cabin. Woke up early the first morning and went outside as the sun was rising. Not a single sound, just as you described. Where was the wind? The summer bugs. The morning birds. Dead silent. I had a brief moment where I considered, what if the apocalypse happened overnight and I'm all that's left? But I knew that was silly. It was spooky the first day, but I grew to enjoy the pure silence. This may have already been mentioned, but Bath Township. That has to be one of the creepiest towns IMO. From the 1927 Bath School Massacre. My grandma was sick that day and stayed home from school. So, she was one of the lucky ones. For decades, every Memorial Day, I'd go with her to the cemetery to plant flowers on the graves. Only once did we venture into the memorial park. It definitely felt different. And while we were the only people in sight, we were definitely not alone. And like others have so aptly described the total dead silence of the Up, that's exactly how it feels to me there. It's so still and eerily quiet. My perspective is that the area just never recovered. The city of Northville isn't creepy, but pulling up to the Northville Psychiatric Hospital in the middle of the night was. It was extremely popular for urban exploring. It's no longer there, but I'm quite sure there are still miles of tunnels underground. Definitely a little unsettling down there. Benton Harbor. Pulled in for gas on my way to the shore, got lost, and ended up driving through the remnants of cult communes. So super uneasy the entire time, but weirdly intrigued. Drove all around town checking out how strange everything was. Went down the rabbit hole learning the history of this place after and felt even more weirded out. There's so much and it's all so bizarre. Keweenaw. Was driving to Petoskey with my wife and sister to visit an old friend. We had the route all planned out, about a 4-hour drive from SA, Michigan. Low traffic, decent weather. It was a trip we knew pretty well for the most part. Somehow we ended up pulling into town 7 hours later, and to this day none of us can account for that 3-hour difference. We drove up that way for a skiing weekend a year or two ago. I don't recall the specific feeling of losing time like that, but I remember it being an eerie drive. North of Saginaw we hit a snowstorm and for 2 hours had to be very mindful of driving cautiously. The 3 other people in the car were asleep and there was no one on the roads except us, some truckers and very few other vehicles. I remember we were on 75 and doing about 30 miles per hour. Note that we come from NW, Ohio, so this is a similar drive for us. We leave late after work to come up for a long weekend and our drive ends up being from about 6 p.m. until after midnight. Broadhead Armory, in the days it was still active before the Marine unit went to Selfridge. I was the duty NCO, watchstander, in the building on a Friday night one summer. I was on one of the upper floors finishing some sort of office work when I heard a conversation. This building had some crazy floor plans, with an actual tunnel that goes partway under the building, doesn't lead anywhere, never did find out why it's there. The 3 floors didn't exactly match up in shape, there was a non-functioning elevator, and multiple stairways. Long story short, I was basically responsible for building security, and I knew the last other Marine had checked out for the weekend 2 hours prior and I'd personally checked that all the doors were locked, secured the hatches in Marine lingo. This wasn't my first time, so I knew my job and I knew I was supposed to be the only one in the building. Talk about the hairs on the back of your neck. Sounded like 2 guys just talking but couldn't make it out, nothing spooky like a horror movie. But due to the crazy way this joint was built the sound could be coming from anywhere. Took me about 30 minutes to go through every room in the building, only to find out the motor transportation sergeant left his radio on a talk show. Don't ask me why it took me 2 hours to notice, maybe the rush hour traffic hit it. Creeped me out no end. Calumet, Michigan is creepy in a delightful way. Around the turn of the 20th century, it was extremely wealthy from the copper boom. They had a population of over 30,000 people. They built a beautiful brick town with theaters, churches, and shops. And then the copper boom ended. The town today has a population of under 1,000, and it's a bit like a living ghost town. But, not creepy in a bad way. We stop there every year on our way to Copper Harbor. There are a couple of cemeteries around Byron Center that have glowing headstones, one's made of glowing phosphorescent rock, there's another one with a solar-powered light on it. I always got really sad vibes out of the village of Bear Lake, especially in the post-recession area. There were some local politics that I'm not entirely aware of, but basically 1 or 2 families ended up owning nearly all the buildings in downtown. One of the patriarchs of one of the families died and there was some family drama that led to nobody actually taking care of the buildings, which culminated in one of the buildings literally falling over into the road. They're coming around finally, but it was a good 10+ years when buildings were falling into dilapidation. In the woods north of Bear Lake is where I had my one and only supernatural experience. Couldn't find my deer stand, walking through the woods and it kept getting darker and darker. Then it got nearly daylight and I found myself about 50 yards behind my uncle's stand, a quarter mile from where I expected to be. This was alleged to be the land of the fee or something. Chambers Road in Caro. I have family that moved not too far, and Google Maps always takes me this way. I have never dived into history, but there are multiple abandoned government buildings surrounded by barbed wire and what looks to be 10 to 15 years overgrowth weeds etc. Then as you get to the end of the road there is what I believe to be a state mental hospital. I am sure someone from the area can chime in, but I always feel creeped out driving by on that slow winding road. The town that still exists around the old K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base. A friend and I went there in like February 2015 to check it out and we were sketched out the entire time. Got the impression that wild dogs ruled that town as soon as the sun set, and not in a Disney kind of way. But also, a few, Kinchalo in any town built around an old military base, or currently operating prison, is going to be pretty sad and creepy. Spooky in summer, downright nightmare-inducing in the winter. Rockport State Recreation Area was pretty cool, but so empty it felt kind of creepy when exploring. We had considered going back there at night to stargaze, but it felt eerie enough during the day we decided it would be safest to not go back at night. In my hometown of Fenton, Michigan, we had an old, dilapidated mansion that was a seminary. Looked spooky from the outside, but oh man, I had a friend of a friend who had access. I'm not sure if he lived there or what. The inside was creepy on a new level. I believe it collapsed like 7 years ago. Then down the road is the Sunken Garden Cemetery. Some truly fascinating grave statues there, but having to trek through swamp to access it gives it certain vibes. The Munchkin Land Cemetery in Berrien County was always a fun and genuinely quite creepy place to visit as troublemaking high schoolers. Slightly more serious, my neighbor murdered his wife and sister and buried them in his yard. You can find the case online easily. This is out on a dark country road. The property subsequently became an unofficial spot for weird truckers to park their rigs in the dark woods and hang out overnight. Felt extremely creepy and unsure, just not in a paranormal way, more in a murder/human trafficking way. I grew up downriver. I was a teenager in the 90s. At night we used to go to Eloise abandoned mental hospital. We also drove around Wyandotte at night. One house had a red driveway, and the theory was a child got run over and instead of cleaning off the blood they just painted it red. LOL, there was another house with child mannequin in the window. The owner used to change it to various positions. Grand Rapids. Detour Village is a small town where you catch the ferry to Drummond Island. Like most small towns, it was founded by a few families who've intermarried. A few retirees from southeast Michigan built places on the lake. During the 1940s and 1950s, it had several popular deer hunting and fishing resorts. The town was once small, then large, then small, a bit larger, then small, and now downstate residents and investors have discovered it and its relatively inexpensive waterfront. The resort cabins by the marina were torn down recently by investors hoping to sell $750,000 condominiums. Good luck with that. The town, rightfully so, wants to be large again, except all the young people leave and never come back. Except by boat, the town was cut off from the outside before M134 made it accessible during the summer season. It used to have several churches, 2 grocery stores, restaurants, a roller rink, 3 hotels, a jail, and a library. Except for the jail, pretty much everything burned to the ground and was never rebuilt. What makes it creepy to me is that it's full of signs of former lives that left and never came back, and what remains are small bones. The old cemetery has many sunken, overgrown, neglected graves with leaning cast iron fences. There are empty lots with apple trees and exposed foundations. Every year, there's a star athlete or prom queen who's killed in a snow machine accident. Someone else's house burns from a propane or chimney fire, and someone's scarred for life. Yet the news stays there. The motel in the center of town burns down when a meth lab explodes. The motel has no insurance, and its owner leaves a pile of rubble and vanishes. The indigenous people are hard-working, constantly battling for their fishing rights. No one gets rich. They barely get by. There was a cult of UFO believers in the 1970s who built a watercraft to meet a mothership out on Lake Huron. Despite the fact that you've actually seen the unfinished boat in a pole barn in the woods outside of town, no one will acknowledge what went on. And the fear of Wendigo is real. Everyone claims to know of a hunter who fell victim. And when you visit, the unfamiliar cashier at the grocery store says, "Oh, you're kid. I've heard so much about you. Do you still work at job you left 20 years ago? Are you staying until Tuesday like you did the last time?" 2. I'm extremely late to this thread, but I'm going to go for an out-of-the-box answer and say Birmingham. My sisters and I used to joke that it felt like a movie set. Everything downtown feels like it could have been constructed yesterday, like the buildings just appeared there overnight or weren't really real. Nothing has any appearance of age, it's just a collection of businesses and restaurants designed to cater to the upper middle class. Even the old movie theater with the big marquee felt like it was just designed to look that way because it gave the town some kind of grounding in history. The whole place feels like liminal space. This place, me and my friend went walking to a party store that was next to the Diamondback Saloon. We walked down Old Denton around midnight, we talked to the cashier for like 10 minutes and went walking back to the apartments on Denton. Neither of us were intoxicated in any way when we got by the cemetery and seen some faint lights like someone parked and had their interior lights of their car on and you could kind of hear whispering, so we just thought they had the windows down because it was during the summer. Then we got closer and seen that it was candle lights and there was 3 or 4 people out there having some kind of devil worship-athlon or something. We could see people turning like they noticed us, but no one ran towards us or anything like a horror movie. It was definitely weird and creepy. I would have thought it was a dream or something if my friend hadn't been there to notice it. Fayette, in the Garden Peninsula, takes the cake for me. Me and an ex went there back in January in the afternoon/evening, and it creeped us out. It's an abandoned mining town that was lived in for only 20-ish years, between 1870 to 1890. There's plenty of old buildings still there, in various states of decay or preservation. It's a state park with a little visitor center. The Garden Peninsula is already devoid of life, with the number of businesses in the area counted on one hand, making for a lonely drive if you go there. I poked fun at her initially for being creeped out by the place, but staring into the windows of some of the houses and hotel as dusk fell on us gave me an incredibly eerie feeling, like we were being watched from afar. We ended up stopping at a friend's place down the road and they proceeded to tell us about the various hauntings that go on there. Locals don't poke around at night for good reason. I highly recommend seeing the place on a nice summer day, just don't go poking around at night. This will seem wimpy in comparison, but a few years ago, I flew into Sawyer International Airport. Yes, we can all laugh at the name, landing extremely late at night. So in the rental car I headed towards Marquette, on the road that went to the airbase the last time I had been in the neighborhood, in total darkness, on the gently winding hilly road that had just been resurfaced so jet black with no lines painted, in the rain, past scattered buildings that hadn't changed since I first saw them in 1981, with no radio or cell reception. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. So, both sides of my family are from Michigan, but my stepdad joined the military and after age 7 I've always lived at least 1,000 miles away from home. I don't get to go home very often due to cost, but every time I'm there I make a pilgrimage up 25/Lakeshore to stop by the empty, abandoned, the garage my grandpa built and a barn from the 1800s still stand, land that once was my grandparents' and great-grandparents' farm in White Rock. It who owns it now, but it's been sitting undeveloped and unchanged for over 25 years. Anyhow, then I carry on to Forester to visit the cemetery where most of that side of the family is buried. The spooky part is, every time I make this trek from Port Huron to White Rock, at some point a black truck appears behind me and follows some of the way. I can't say when it appears and when it leaves, something always distracts me, and I don't see when it enters or exits the road. This pilgrimage of mine involves my biological father's side of the family, and none of them live in Michigan. I'm not in contact with them at all. And I'm not always making the trek with out-of-state plates, as sometimes I fly up and borrow a vehicle from a relative on mom's side. I chalk it up to coincidence. There's nothing sinister about the truck, they're not tailgating or being aggressive in any way. But at this point I expect it, like I'll be passing through Lexington thinking, where's the black truck? Then I'll think about something else, and before I know it, there it is behind me. Simply weird, I guess. I'm from the Salt, but went to college at NMU in Marquette. Everyone loves Marquette, but the whole time I was in college there I always had weird vibes, like desolate and creepy and lonely. But the Salt has always been such a cheerful, happy place for me even though people hate it. Summers in the Salt are always so fun, and the winter is beautiful and sparkly, but Marquette always felt gray and foreboding. I have no idea why. Last October I pulled into Bond Falls just before dark. As I got out to hike down the slick trail, the last vehicles pulled out and left. On my way down in the gathering darkness, I noticed a figure at the bottom on one of the wooden platforms. Getting closer, I could see it was a large person, wearing a dark hoodie with their back turned to me. As I approached, the figure stayed silent and kept its back turned, drawing alongside. He quickly turned his hooded head towards me, revealing the Jason mask he was silently wearing. My dad has lived in Michigan his whole life, but my mom had lived in Florida for years before she moved to Michigan and met my dad. When he first took her up to Marquette from Detroit around half an hour after they got there, she had a panic attack and they had to leave. She said it wasn't the end of the world, but you could see it from there, meaning it was too far away from everything. I think it's passed down, 'cause every time I visit the area, even though it's more densely populated than where I live, it takes hours to get over the anxiety. Especially after visiting the local Dead Mall. Ypsilanti. I spent many nights in Mountain Home Cemetery on West Main Street in Kalamazoo when I went to college there. There's a crypt in the cemetery that some friends and I managed to get into, and that was really creepy. This was over 10 years ago, but I remember it was really dark and really quiet. There's a hill in the middle of the cemetery that had nice views of the city at night, but was also where the children's graves were, so that was kind of a bummer. Just north of the cemetery was the Southwestern Michigan Sanatorium. It was demolished during my first year of college, but the pictures I've seen made it look super creepy. I've walked through that neighborhood, and it definitely gave me the creeps. I lived in Denver in the early/mid-aughts and once gave a guided tour in my bathrobe to a host of friends from out of town of the old TB ward. I and some friends were responsible for the hole in the south fence. If you ever entered that way, the beige couch in the woods behind the houses was mine. Sorry, not sorry. Had a lot of fun there as it was my backyard. We had airsoft battles, capture the flag, hide and seek. But the best was getting in there before anyone else did and spooking them. That overturned piano on an upper floor was great to hide behind and pluck strings on. Someone removed one of the morgue trays while I lived next door. Someone tried to burn it down from the foyer multiple times. Silly cult pentagrams and dead pigeons, missing heads in the upper offices. I think I have a green file folder of random records from one of the nurse cages. I was honestly saddened when they tore it down in the name of progress. Edit to add, one of the greatest views of Kalamazoo was standing up there on the topmost roof above the elevators, looking down on all the holiday lights with fat snowflakes coming down, Sprout Tower in the distance and the bank building downtown. Royal Oak. My wife took her friend who was black to the stifling air balloon festival to try out her new camera way back before we were married. Said they left early cause a lot of people were staring at them and the vibe was uneasy. I said, yes, there's a pretty heavy KKK association in that area, and she was shocked. She had no idea. This would have been maybe 12 to 13 years ago. We were driving through the UP from 2 to 8, all the way to Minnesota. Somewhere on 8, we had seen what looked to be a ghost town in the distance. Old Western-style buildings like a saloon you'd see in a John Wayne movie. On the way back through coming home we could not find it again. I've tried to look up a town close to 8 that I could see from that road in the distance. Can't find a thing, but I'll never forget that sight. Nor will my wife. Kalkaska, about 1986. Dad took me up to Sleeping Bear Dunes and we spent the day hiking out to the lake and back. On the way back home, we were looking for a place to eat and stopped at a Big Boy in Kalkaska. Soon as we walked in we got the creeps. The place was full of people over 70 and they all just stopped and looked up at us and stared. Nobody said a word. There was no music playing either. No greeter came out to meet us. We just stood there in this bizarre silence for a few minutes, looked at each other, and left. Very weird. Detroit. People strung out, stumbling on the sidewalk, falling into the road. Saw another guy at a gas station bus stop, with his pants around his ankles, helicoptering his dick. Once I was in the parking lot waiting on my haircut appointment, this lady with scabs all over her face sat down on the bench right in front of my car/the barber shop, and just started shooting up like it was nothing. Glad I don't live there anymore. A good creepy place to camp. Saukko Lake Campground. We had some weird stuff happen to us. From hearing 2 sets of footprints to not seeing those footprints or shadows. A flash of light from above. A giant sounding tiny mouse in the leaf by the outhouse. Rustic. Very rustic. I camped around Lake Gogebic with friends just before COVID in August. It was beautiful up there, but weird. One day I saw a UFO, this is in the afternoon, a couple of days before we were leaving. I like the wilderness, as I'm a wilderness kind of person, but yes, it was fun, but I'm with you, very silent at times. Ann Arbor. Drove south through Byron, Michigan and got deep Deliverance vibes. I actually had to check myself a little and just say, hey, these people are just living their lives, but the tiny barest scratch of a town center had an uncanny valley feeling that left me deeply unsettled for the rest of that car ride. Dead of winter, my band had a house show, I believe it was in Columbiaville. Dirt road through the woods. Snow on the ground. We pass a driveway with a low address, we pass an unmarked dirt path, we come to a driveway with a high address. We turned around and headed into the woods. From behind the trees on either side of the car, they come charging at us. Easily keeping pace with the station wagon were, I swear to God, 100 St. Bernards. This could not possibly be the right place, but the path was too narrow to turn around, so I kept driving. Eventually, I could see that they were behind an electric fence. We pulled into a clearing and they were gone. Just a small house. We played a regular show. Didn't see any dogs on the way out. I don't know if you could recreate that, but that's the spookiest place I've ever been in Michigan. Morley. Stopped there years ago, and something just felt odd. People were strange, like out of a Stephen King movie. I didn't stay long. A decade later, at a dinner party, I brought this subject up in conversation, but couldn't remember the town's name, only that it was north of Grand Rapids. Another guest interjected and said it sure sounds like Morley. She had the same experience, and also never revisited. West Bloomfield. Clarksville, Michigan. Friend and I got off at the exit for gas on the way to Grand Rapids. Everyone at the gas station kept staring at us, and there were a bunch of creepy political signs all over the place. Attendant told my friend, "You're not from around here. Boy, it's best you get on out here." We did, and I've never ever gone there again. I looked it up just now, and there's only 394 people living there. Honorable mention, Kevington. The population was like 70. I stopped at a gas station there on my way home from Marquette. There was a flyer posted there of a missing woman, Leah Harding, who to this day hasn't been located and is believed by the community to be deceased. Something about the town made me uneasy, although the clerk was a nice older woman. Bath by far. It just has a dark, unsettled feeling. I don't live too far from it and have to drive through every once in a while. For those of you who don't know, Bath was the site of the biggest school mass murder in United States history in 127. In a series of attacks, Andrew Kehoe killed 45, mainly children, and injured 50 plus. Astral Beach. The houses were extremely close together. It was 70 degrees and sunny and no children were outside, but toys lay abandoned near houses and in the parks. The adults who were outside gave us the stink eye as we drove past. It felt like we'd stepped into Children of the Corn. Kalamazoo. The basement of my 130-year-old house. It's a classic Michigan basement, so the ancient stairs are dangerous and rickety, it's full of spiders and it looks like a dungeon. I try to avoid going down there when I can. Allegan. I wouldn't necessarily say creepy/eerie but more so sad/depressing, but Christmas Michigan, you expect it to be such a cheery happy place, but the whole place seemed very dead, like it feels like it might have been a cool tourist attraction a few years ago but has since then died. Pear Cheney in Grayling. Old town along the railroad with only a cemetery left. Lots of crazy stories. I graduated Grayling High School in '07 and we used to go there for lots of reasons. Skipping school, boredom, parties. Small town, in the middle of nowhere. Conneaut. I've been there. It's a bizarre restaurant, hotel, and bowling alley amalgamation. It definitely had Twin Peaks energy when I ate there. I absolutely loved it. Slightly creepy, but it never felt unsafe at all, and everyone was very friendly. There's also a great cafe in the same parking lot, which is worth a visit. The Old Cemetery in Seney. The sunken graves from decayed wooden caskets from the 1800s just hit different in the middle of the night with the way the woods are dead silent in the up at night. Until a wolf howls or something snaps a stick, and you jump out of your shoes. Northville Psychiatric Hospital. Went there back in 2021. Me and my husband took the trail that was behind the hospital and walked over an overgrown fence to get in. There was a police officer in the area, a cruiser was parked down the road where the trial was, so the idea of running into someone else out there was scary. Didn't know about the tunnels till after we visited, but those sound even creepier. Drove from GR to Detroit just to explore abandoned buildings and places, so it was an interesting trip. A few months ago, my husband and I stopped at a big antique store right off a main artery through the southwestern part of the state. We went in, and everything seemed really claustrophobic. The store was jam-packed with antiques. There was only one person working, and he kept encouraging us to go into the second part of the store, which he apologized for being unlit. My husband, not catching how freaked out I was, said sure. It was at that point that I noticed how many mannequins and mannequin heads were randomly placed around the store. So, we went into the second part of the store and the antique furniture was arranged in such a way that the whole second half of the store was an unlit maze. At the end of every dead end of this maze was a freaking mannequin. We got out of there really quickly. Camped at Leelanau State Park in May. Fairly busy park in the summer but completely dead in the spring. I think there were maybe 2 other campers there, in the entire park, when we went, but it was just so quiet and eerie by our campsite. We were surrounded by woods, and I just felt so unnerved the entire time. Every noise felt ominous. I'm an experienced camper but wouldn't walk 30 feet to the bathroom without my husband. It's just a thick dark wood on this peninsula surrounded by zero light. October 10th though would return. Best campground I've ever been to.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. the internet surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.